It is full-blown April. It's draft month. We are 3 weeks away from the NFL draft. We are talking linebackers tonight. This is the Gold Zone, brought to you by Game On Wisconsin. Let's hit it. A little issue there. What is up, Packers fans? I could not find my button. This is why we need producers and everything like that. This is the Gold Zone, brought to you by Game On Wisconsin. I do want to start this show by saying follow us, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all your fun social media websites. The other thing I do want to talk about is Aaron Jones's father passed away today. So something we're all doing, I know I've done it myself today, Jake, I believe you have as well, is donating to his foundation. You can use that link below. The AA All the Way foundation that they use to help youths in their area. So donate to that foundation if you can. I'm your host. I'm Jacob Westendorf, and I am here tonight in the Game On Wisconsin studios, joined as always by the great Jacob Morley. Did you break any lawnmowers tonight, Jake?
Dude, no, I actually sold it, man. Just sold it. That's how I was actually talking to a guy on Facebook Market just before here, wheeling and dealing, trying to get rid of that thing. And, yeah, it's been a long journey. I actually found a really nice deal on a brand new lawnmower. So you got to strike when the iron's hot, as they say, Jacob. So I did that. But you know what, Jacob? This isn't Game On Lawnmower. This isn't the Lawnmower Zone. This is the Gold Zone, man. And what do we got on tap for today?
We have actually some enemies here in the territory, and we have that is Russell Brown, that of cover1.net, but we won't give him too much guff, but he is a Detroit Lions fan. So First and foremost, Russ, my condolences for the exit of Matthew Stafford. I know that stung you guys a little bit, but take us inside a little bit of how you guys are feeling about biting kneecaps and everything going on in Detroit right now.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. It's one of those things with a new head coach, a new regime. It's kind of like a breath of fresh air in a sense. And it's cool that we're done with Matt Stafford in a sense because of what we got in return. Like the fact that we were able to get 2 first-round picks and a starting caliber quarterback. Like Jared Goff's not great by any means. He's not Matt Stafford level. But, I mean, he was in the Super Bowl not too long ago. And granted, most of that was probably the players around him and the coaching staff. But, I mean, it's a little bit optimistic. So we'll see. I mean, I think the hope was that at 7 they could take a quarterback. And now it looks like we're going to probably see 4, maybe even 5 quarterbacks off the board before we even get to the 7th pick. So, they're not necessarily going to get maybe the cream of the crop for quarterback this year, but it's exciting. I mean, it's truly a kind of a new regime, and the way that they're doing things, it's completely different than anything we've seen over the last probably 10 years.
And I can tell you the point made here. Yes, you do have Jamal Williams.
Yes.
So you guys take care of the swag daddy for us. He is fantastic. You'll love him even more as a person than you will as a player. So
yeah,
let's talk some linebackers, guys. I know Russ has got his time is valuable is the way we're going to put that. So we have a few things we want to go over tonight. And the first thing I want to talk about is just some of the guys in this class. And are we all set on Micah Parsons being your favorite linebacker in this draft class? And Russ, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, he certainly is for me. I know there's some off the field stuff that's got to get cleared up for him, but I think just from a playmaking standpoint, there isn't one better in this class that can make the plays that he can make consistently. Now, I know there's a player that we're going to talk about. I won't drop his name just because I want to keep people kind of interested, but I do like the player that we're going to talk about with Parsons, though. He is, again, just a playmaker. He's very dynamic in his own right. He attacks upfield incredibly well. And one of those guys that can drop into coverage. And like I said, he can attack. When he's moving upfield and he's blitzing and he's playing in the box, he is so talented. Now, his draft value, his range of where he could go, he could be the first defensive player off the board, or he could very well be the third or fourth defensive player off the board, because it seems really spotty because he didn't play this past year. There's not been a ton of opportunities to really clear up anything off the field. So, teams are going to really characterize that and put some value into that. So I love him, though. I think he's a great player. So I'm wishing him all the best at the next level for sure.
One of those players that we've talked about it, Jake, that, if he's available for Green Bay when he's picking, you probably don't want him. But from the standpoint of just the pure player aspect of things, what are your thoughts on Parsons and what Green Bay could do with him? If they said tomorrow they were trading up all the way to pick number 5, let's just say, for example, everything cleared and they really loved him. For starters, I think they've given up the next 10 drafts.
That is rich.
You better be you better be Ray Lewis and then something, man. And I like Parsons. I think, just to echo everything you guys said, Parsons has one of our highest grades, collectively in the KC draft guide, and everybody loved his film. He's just a type of player. He doesn't move, he floats. He's a special guy on the field. He's always around the ball. He's a playmaker. He does leave a little bit, I think, to be desired as far as a coverage linebacker, but I'm not playing him that way. I'm going to put him in just attack mode the entire game and just watch him wreck stuff. And like you both have alluded to, he does have some off-field stuff. So if he is there at 29 or at the end of the first round, he's probably not going to be picked by the Packers, just because I would assume he's just off their board. But when you just talk about pure impact player on the defensive side of the ball, Micah Parsons is the best in this draft class, right? I mean, yeah. I'm honestly trying to think. There's no D lineman, there's no edge that's better than him. There's no corner. Surtain, maybe, probably not though. I mean, yeah, he's the best. But yeah, he's the best impact player on the defensive side of the ball in this draft class. So someone that the Packers are probably not going to have a shot at. But honestly, a team like the Lions takes him. That's something when you you talk about division rivals and guys that would scare you having to play against. The Packers have kind of struggled against teams with really high impact inside linebackers the last couple of years. So if the Lions were to go out and do that, and maybe old Danny Campbell's talking about biting kneecaps and doing all that stuff and watching other teams and what has given Aaron Rodgers fits, and he says, give me Micah Parsons. We want that guy. We got to stop 12. That's the guy we need to do it. And he might be right if they do that. So Micah Parsons should be long gone before the Packers pick. I think we don't even need to talk about him much more than we have. He's one of the best players in this draft class.
Yeah, I just want to wrap it up real quick. What I can say is that if he comes to Green Bay, he's instantly the most talented linebacker they've had since Nick Barnett's, AJ Hawk. I mean, we're going back quite a ways. The Packers haven't had a playmaker in the middle of that defense other than, that part of the year where they had Clay Matthews in the middle there. But he was kind of just a guy. I think that was something that if there was more film on him eventually, like if he did that from 2014 through the rest of his career, that probably would have gotten figured out at some point that, you could find his weaknesses that way. But instead, he was really good for that stretch. But otherwise, they just haven't had playmakers in that part of the field. And the next guy I want to move to, so you have that, tier, of course. My question for you, Russ, is J.O.K., and I'm not going to try and butcher his name, but the linebacker safety extraordinaire out of Notre Dame. What do you think is his best position, first of all? And what are you worried at all that maybe he's not, quote unquote, set in one position?
It does worry me a little bit. And I'll butcher his name for you. I've done it enough on my draft podcast and on radio shows anyways. So it's Jeremiah Owusu-Karamoah. And I might have even said it wrong, but yeah, Joke's an interesting player, man. He's such an impactful player as far as just he's electric. He's got great range, the change of direction that he brings and the way that he's able to just at the snap of the finger go from the left side of the field to the right side of the field and just be involved in the plays. And I love the way he's an aggressive tackler. He's not always going to wrap up, and he does miss tackles and he does miss the availability, the opportunity to shed blocks, but he's a talented player. I think his range is certainly probably somewhere in the top 20. Maybe some of the offensive players push him out. So I don't know if he's necessarily going to be in the radar for Green Bay, but I would have to think his position would be more of like that box safety. He's going to take tight ends when they go in the slot. He's going to handle running backs out of the backfield, and he'll play some of that overhang stuff. It'll be similar in a sense to what he did at Notre Dame. I don't know if we're necessarily going to see him align like as a single high safety or anything, but he's definitely going to play in that box safety type of role. And, he might be able to carve out himself a really nice career, similar to like Shaq Thompson, what he's been able to do for Carolina. I think people forget that he was basically one of the first, I don't want to say the first one ever, but one of the first box safeties we've seen probably over the last 10 years. He's kind of one of the guys that was developed for specifically that role. And Carolina's had him in their system forever, it feels like, and he's been really good. So I think he could have a similar career.
Yeah, and that would be the concern, right? Is the developmental time of how long it takes. You saw, last year, the moldable ball of clay was Isaiah Simmons from Clemson, and it took him a while to kind of figure out what's he doing. For me, with Joke, it's finding a position. I think he's that second level defender. Like you said, I don't think he's going to play safeties all that well. If he's in the slot covering somebody, I certainly hope it is a tight end or a running back as opposed to, those wide receivers. Because if they catch you in that, I think you're going to find yourself in a little bit of trouble. But he's interesting. If you're looking for immediate impact, he's somebody that I would certainly advise some patience with. Jake, we've got a little bit going here, but what are your thoughts? Does it worry you at all with those positionless guys, anything like that? I'm just, Russ mentioned Shaq Thompson, but I do know, kind of in general, players like that have tended to struggle because it takes forever for a defensive. It's just so hard for a defensive coordinator to figure out how to use those guys in their best ways.
Yeah, I think when you talk about Jock, to me, he's a safety, and you want to talk for the Packers. Like I see people in the comments right now, Raven Green, that's a Ferrari Raven Green. And I just, as much as, I like that kind of that big sub package type safety, I just don't know if I want to invest that type of capital in someone like that. And I don't love his game. I really don't, because he's the size of a linebacker that plays more like a safety. But I think when he gets in the NFL, that doesn't really translate there either to be a safety. So, and I could be totally wrong on him, but he's just not my cup of tea. When you talk about linebackers, those types of guys just, they don't do it for me. And this is coming from someone who loved Isaiah Simmons last year, but Jock is just not that level of athlete. And don't get me wrong, he's a very good athlete, but just when you see fit in Green Bay, I don't love it. And, so I'm saying all this right now, and he'll probably be the pick at 29 for the Packers for all we know. Someone, you know what I mean, Jacob, like someone that we've hardly ever talked about, but could go in that range is kind of, he is from a blue blood program. And it would be
cold weather school, which Goody cares about. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff in there that leads, and there's just enough. Marcus Eversole talked about this with me today. He was like, there's just enough of a surprise if it's Jeremiah Joker. I'm not even going to try. Yeah. I know Russ just did that earlier, but I'm not going to. So I'll be interested to see, where he falls and how that works. Because last year, even Isaiah Simmons ended up getting picked a little bit later than some of the other guys did. So it was interesting to figure that part out as well, to kind of where those guys fall. Because, the NFL, for as many things as it is, they're still traditionalists in some senses, or at least there are coaching staffs in enough places that are that way to figure that out. So Russ teased this a little bit earlier. Let's talk about Zaven Collins, because that guy seems to be polarizing, I think is the best way to put this for me, because I know at least one person in this group of three isn't necessarily the biggest fan. So Russ, what are your thoughts on Mr. Collins?
I like Zaven Collins a lot, and I don't know if everybody – and I'm assuming Jake is not a fan, which is fine. And, each their own, right? Like that's what makes evaluating players so great. But I thought from a size perspective at 6'4", 260, for the athletic ability that I saw from him, I thought, wow, that's really good athleticism for somebody his size. I thought he moved incredibly well. And I thought he was really versatile. He played in a variety of spots. He didn't just play like off the edge. He didn't do anything like that. Like he was all over that defense in the box, and he could flash the range. He could drop into coverage. You saw his pick six, and that's what really kind of put him on the map. But I just thought what he can do in the movement skills it makes him so intriguing. I feel like he's kind of become this forgotten player in the first round, and he could easily go to a place like Green Bay and play right next to Martin and be a great fit and just be a stud. And I think it would be a great fit for Green Bay personally if he was to go to a place like that. But I don't know if he's necessarily going to be there. I think there's some really linebacker needy teams like Miami at 18 and Las Vegas at 17. And I think there's just some teams there that could look at him, and even a team like maybe Tennessee as well. So I think he's got some really intriguing fits before the Packers make up the selection, but the overall ability that he has, I think, is really good. And I think there's still some untapped potential there. So I think an NFL team will get a good player.
All right, Jake, your last direct message to me about Zaven Collins was, I believe, quote, Zaven a bum. So
Zaven a bum. So I don't think Zaven's a bum. I don't think he's a bum. But here's my issue with Zaven Collins. It's more about value. And I like other guys better than him that I think are going to go later. And anything you want to tell me about Zaven Collins, my response will be go watch the UCF game where he gets bopped. And it's not even Otis Anderson, who's the good little tiny running back they have. It's the little redshirt freshman, Demarius Good. And I think it's just a little simple flat route, and Zaven gets put on his keister. This guy's got 100 pounds on him. And like, it's just stuff like that. It's little things that you can be the biggest, fastest guy in the world, and it's not just that. He's soft, man. He is a soft player. And I just can't think of, and this is the issue, and I'll ask you guys, who's the last guy that you can think of that was big, strong, athletic, played soft at the linebacker position and figured it out at the NFL level?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think if that is in fact the assessment that comes through, is if they're soft, that we talked about.
The player that came for me, and I know you were talking there, Jacob, but I'm going to cut you off. And
you're good.
It's I'm not a big pro comparison guy, but like the player that I thought of kind of stylistically was Kyle Van Noy. And I thought he was somewhat soft in a sense at the NFL. And again, part of it was because he played for the Lions and he went on to New England and played pretty well. But I mean, he was let go from Miami. And I think he was let go from Miami for some of those reasons that you're saying. So, and again, he wasn't taken extremely high. He wasn't like a top 10 pick or anything, but you take a player like that and you hope to mold him into something, and he's not. And part of it's because he's missing tackles and doing those types of things. And just not doing, the little things are the big things, right? You mentioned the little things of getting knocked over by a guy from, that's 100 pounds lighter than you. Well, that makes a difference, whether it's in practice every day or whether it's on game day on Sunday. So I'm kind of with you there. And I mean, I think it would be somewhat, I mean, I can understand why you'd be hesitant to it, but I just think, like I said, I think there's just so much with him that it's the untapped potential that I would have to roll the dice on.
Yeah. And I mean, I have an answer to that too. Like Van Noy's a good answer to that. And a guy that I think of as like a Derek Johnson coming out of Texas, the way he played, he was such a chase linebacker at Texas and couldn't deconstruct blocks to save his life when he got into the NFL, figured it out. So like it's not that it can't happen, right? It's just about mitigating risk. And that's my biggest thing with Zaven. So if Zaven is there at 62 and the Packers took Zaven Collins at 62 and he somehow is there, I would be thrilled. But the fact of the matter is it's more likely that, a Jabril Cox will be there at 6'2", potentially like a Baron Browning will be there at 6'2". And I just like the value of that so much better than a Zaven Collins in round one. That's really my main critique with it.
All right, so we're running a little short on time here with Russ. So let's get towards the end here, or not towards the end, but you get past those first kind of 2 to 3 guys that I'm talking about here with Joker, and then you've got Micah Parsons, and then of course Zaven Collins, like we just mentioned. Jake just mentioned a few guys as we get there. Once we get a little bit later into the draft, day 2 and maybe early day 3, because that's spoiler alert, everybody, that's where the Packers are going to end up picking a linebacker is one of those rounds like that. So who are some guys that fit into that maybe 2, 3, 4 range that you think would be good fits there?
I'm going to jump in real quick and just ask you guys a question, because I think one of the most volatile players in this draft is Jamin Davis, the Kentucky kid. Is he a first round pick? Is he a third round pick? Because if you want to tell me he's a third round pick, Yes, please sign me up for that. If you want to tell me he's going to go 14 like Mel Kiper thinks, no, thank you. You know what I mean? So like, I want to hear your guys' thoughts on him, just because I feel like, there's always a handful of players that just people are all over the place on. And I think he's one of those guys this year.
Well, I didn't do a full evaluation on him. I recently dropped the 125 player draft guide, and I didn't include him there. I mean, there's a couple of guys. Greg Newsom's not in there, but it's just one of those I didn't get to their tape. But with Jamin Davis, I actually watched him over the weekend, and it's funny, man. Like, I see this guy that's like basically like WWF spine bustering people, and it's like, all right, that's cool. But then I'm watching him, and it's like, he's looking a little bit lost in coverage. He's not really knowing where he needs to drop it into his zones, and he's kind of guessing in that regard. I thought from an athletic perspective, yeah, it's certainly there. I mean, the guy is jacked, and he moves incredibly well. But I'm with you. I would definitely be hesitant to take this kid like 14th overall. If you were Green Bay, and let's say, the run on the linebackers happen and he's your next highest graded linebacker and you wanted to take him in the first round, I'm not opposed to that. If you feel like I said, untapped potential, if you feel like you can get into that, sure. But I would definitely be more comfortable, I think, with him just off of what I've seen, probably somewhere on the second day of the draft, just because I think you're talking 1 year production and just some of the inconsistencies kind of make me weary in a sense. And I thought, some of the linebackers we talked about before, just overall their tape was much more consistent.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think he's one of those, if you're picking him, you're betting on upside. And to Russ's point, if you've got that run on linebackers, for them to take Jamin Davis at 29, there would have to be a run on linebackers, a run on corners. Holland and Merrick, both safeties are gone. All the receivers all the way down to Rashad Bateman are gone, and the tackles are into that class too. So, the point we're going to make here, and Jake, we'll talk about this in a little bit too, is my thought on linebackers is if you can get a stud, get a stud. Otherwise, take some swings later on. Similar to the process the Packers had when they drafted Oren Burks. Just don't draft Oren Burks if that is in fact the case. So let's go through there. Russ, last question I want to ask before we let you go, because I know we got a little bit going. Jake just mentioned earlier, division rival. Who's the one guy? It doesn't have to be a linebacker, just the guy that if Green Bay drafts him, you're like, damn, that sucks.
Oh, man. Well, they do it every year. So, I mean, it was Kenny Clark. Jamal Williams, when you guys drafted him, it's like every year you guys take one of my guys.
Jordan Love.
Well, not recently. Let me just say that. Recently, I'm like, I don't know what you guys are doing. But, you guys talk about wide receiver quite often on Twitter, not necessarily YouTube, but I'm saying kind of your fan base, what receivers do we need? And I agree. You guys should probably draft a receiver at some point. But the one guy would be De'Ami Brown out of North Carolina. If you guys ended up drafting
him, came to the right place.
Dude, if you guys draft him, and you probably will, I'm going to cry. And it's just one of those things, man. I love his skill set. Some of his game, again, like I said, I'm not a big pro comp guy. I did write a pro comparison for you. It was Lee Evans when I wrote it down. But I thought kind of the upside to his game was Stephon Diggs. I thought the shades of his game was Stephon Diggs. And I thought he was a pretty fluid route runner. The double moves that he hits, the way he can get vertical up the field, very impressive player, and he can create after the catch. I just thought overall his tape was really, really good. And North Carolina's got some players, no doubt about it, but he was one of the guys that was certainly just one of the most consistent. And then to go to your linebacker question, because we kind of swept over it, you mentioned, some guys from like 2, 3, 4 range in those rounds that would make sense for the Packers. And Baron Browning out of Ohio State would have been one of those guys that I would have listed. The production scares me, or the lack of production scares me in a sense, because this guy was a 5-star recruit out of Texas, could have went anywhere, went to Ohio State, and has never really been like that 5-star player. But I love the way he drops into coverage. He sinks his hips. He's very fluid in that regard. He gets to where he needs to be, and he's an effective blitzer with good length. And he showed it at the Senior Bowl as well. He was covering tight ends. The other guy, Garrett Wallow out of TCU, I think is incredibly underrated. He's an aggressive player, kind of has like a Leighton Vander Esch to his game in a sense. I think it's more so the washboard on the neck, but he's just a fun player, aggressive, and he gets after it. He was a former safety, and he started right away for TCU as a safety. It's like a 3-star recruit. Nobody knew who he was, and he played safety, special teams guy. So I think just from an effort standpoint and special teams and just really all around, You take him maybe 4th or 5th round, and we could be talking about him in 2-3 years.
He's Russ Brown. You can find him on Twitter. He's at Russ NFL Draft. Find him for NFL Draft takes on the Michigan State Spartans and future New York Yankee. His son just finished up a baseball game tonight. So
yeah, he was 2 for 3, struck out, but I don't think he's going to. I mean, Yankees maybe. I don't know. Are you a Yankees fan?
I am. So that's
boy.
a long story that we'll have to do that. Are you a Tigers fan? I don't remember.
Oh yeah.
Okay. The one, not to go through all the great memories that you guys have, but the team with Verlander, Scherzer, Price, I still have no idea how those teams never won a championship back in those days. But I have been to Comerica. It's one of my favorite parks to visit. So you guys have, honestly, from a stadium standpoint. Oh yeah, I've been to Comerica. I've been through Ford Field a couple times. My bachelor party was actually at Ford Field.
What?
Yeah, Mason Crosby missed like 17 kicks.
That was a
2 years ago.
Great game.
Westendorf's fault. Wow.
Yeah, it was my fault. I remember very vividly afterwards. My tweet was I wouldn't call him by his name. I said, make the kicker walk back to Green Bay and then cut him on Monday. And then he kicked the game-winning field goal the following week. So I guess
I think I remember that. I think I remember you tweeting that. Well, if you guys are ever downtown or whatever, let me know and I'll come on down.
Absolutely. Appreciate you stopping by. We'll see if we can get you in again close to the draft. Otherwise, tell everybody where we could find your stuff. You mentioned your draft guide. I don't want to gloss over that either.
Yeah, no, find me on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. Pretty much where I do everything from breaking film down to writing articles to talking about sports betting that I'm terrible at and the NFL Draft, of course. And you can find my NFL Draft guide. It's pinned on my profile. So it's free to download. If you're feeling generous, you want to send some money, don't send it to me, send it to Ronald McDonald House Charity and give it to kids in needs, because that's much more important than me giving, you giving me $5. I don't need it. Give it to them. So appreciate it, guys. It's always fun, and we'll talk soon for sure.
A gentleman and a humanitarian. Again, that's Russell Brown. Russ, appreciate you stopping by. We'll see you again.
See you guys.
All right. Thanks to Russ for stopping by. And now we've got a little bit more things to talk about here tonight. This is not just a guest related show. I'd like to think you guys stop by at least to listen to what us two idiots have to say. Let's go. Maybe not. But,
because they're smart.
That could be. Jake, let's just start here. I know he talked about Diami Brown. So I know this isn't
got me off the rails, man.
Yeah.
Got me off the rails.
I'm telling you, I don't know. Would you take him at 29? Because there's somebody that
NFL
will.
would be on notice. I know. We've been pounding that drum all draft season. Why not Diami at 29? I mean, as one of Diami's biggest fans, even I'll admit, like, man, things would probably have to not fall a certain way for the Packers to want to do that. But you ain't gonna find me crying about it if it happens. Tell you that much.
No, sir, not at all. So I'll be interested to see if that's something that they can do. But I did mention today I was on WDZ with Marcus Eversole, a friend of the program here, and he was talking about ideal first 3 picks. And my pick at 62, my ideal pick at 62 was Diami Brown. So that part was interesting, and we'll get into more of some of that stuff here as we get. We're 3 weeks away from the draft. I didn't mention this yet, but next week we have Eric Crocker. He's talking cornerbacks again. So as much as him talking receivers was fun, I'm really excited to listen to him talk about these DBs, because that's a big deal. So let's move into our topic here. The one question that I have that I wanted to talk about with you is the Packers' philosophy on linebackers. And I don't know if there's a bigger disconnect between what the fans think the team needs versus like how the Packers think they should view that position than there is that this off-ball linebacker position. And just something I mentioned, I wrote an article for Packer Report after the season ended. And I just said, 2010, they had Desmond Bishop, they had AJ Hawk, both played really well, and they won the Super Bowl. Their defensive DVOA that season was 2nd in the NFL. Since then, and it's 2011 to present, so you guys can follow along chronologically, 26th, 8th, 31st, 16th, 9th, 22nd, 24th, 29th, and then the last 2 seasons, 15th and 17th. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's all tied to the linebacker position, but after the last 2 years watching the team season end because of, well, not just because of, but the 49ers, they have Fred Warner and they had Quan Alexander and they had some players in there. Alexander didn't play in the NFC Championship game, obviously, but Fred Warner's a stud. And then Tampa Bay this year obviously had Devin White and Levante David, and the Packers are running out, with all due respect to these guys, Chris Barnes and Christian Kirksey, not exactly in the top echelon. So my question to you, Jake, is this a philosophy that the Packers should change?
Man, that's such a tough thing to answer because the Chiefs just won a Super Bowl. I mean, you look at the last 2 Super Bowl winners, and it couldn't be more opposite how they won, right? So when you say, do they have to change a philosophy to win a Super Bowl? I think no. I think they have the right philosophy to win Super Bowls, and that's why they're always in contention to do it. But man, wouldn't it be fun? Wouldn't it be fun, Jacob, just to have a stud in the middle of the field flying around making plays? I mean, that's for my own personal enjoyment of watching football. Yeah, I want that guy. I want that guy. Middle linebacker, inside linebackers that are good is it's one of the most exciting, fun positions to watch on the field because it's such an impact position. Do you need one? No, you don't. You don't need one. The Chiefs just won a Super Bowl with, a couple of beer truck delivery guys as that are inside linebackers. But for me, the Packers, and I think it comes to this, Jacob, we've talked about this. You've already mentioned it today. If you think you can find that guy, if you think you can find a Darius Leonard, if you think you can find a Fred Warner in round 3 or 4, then yeah, do it. But do we want to take one at 29? I don't think so. And I don't think I just think I'm going to take my swings on day 2 at that position and hope I can find a stud, right? I'm not going to take my swings on day 1, even though they were in on Devin Bush. Like we know that, with almost certainty that they were very in. They liked him a lot at that spot, top 10 or 10th overall, whatever it was. So it's just tough because, yeah, it's easy to point to the Packers and say, Jacob, like, yeah, they don't care about this position. Well, but they were in on this stud that they didn't get. And then they haven't really invested in. They have invested. I mean, Oren Burks was a big investment. He just doesn't play football well. He's just not a good football player. That's one of the biggest whiffs in the last 5 years for this Packers team. I mean, even though he wasn't a top, 50 picker, and he's terrible. Like, I know he's a great guy. I know he's a good person. He's not a good football player, and that sucks because it'd be nice if he was, but Jake, that's so tough to answer because yes, like everything within me wants to say, yes, go find a stud inside linebacker. But they don't need to. They don't need to win a Super Bowl. It just would be fun, But then also, Jacob, let me ask you this question. What would we have to complain about if they had an inside linebacker?
Wide receivers.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, yeah, that's an easy. So what they'll do is they'll find a way to get an inside linebacker and a receiver. So they'll take like Rashad Bateman and Jabril Cox with their first 2 picks, and then we'll have nothing to complain about ever again, I guess. But, to finish the answer, to answer my own question, I am of the belief of if they have a chance to take a stud, that maybe they should take him. Now, if you look at it, you mentioned taking a shot on guys on day 2. The only first-round pick that I mentioned of those guys from Tampa and San Francisco, respectively, was Devin White. Devin White was a top 5 pick. He was a stud. Devin Bush was a top 10 pick. Same thing, stud. Green Bay, would they have taken him at 12 if he was available? I think the answer to that question might be only if Rashawn Gary wasn't. But we'll never know. The thing I have is Fred Warner was a 2nd-round pick, or a 3rd-round pick, excuse me. Levante David was a 2nd-round pick. Darius Leonard, like you mentioned, he wasn't a 1st-round pick either. So there are guys that you can find. I just think Green Bay should take more swings. When you talk about the guys that are studs, you could find them a little bit later, and that's at least certainly a possibility. Now, when you talk about the guys that are studs in this draft, like I mentioned, if Micah Parsons is available, you probably don't want to draft him. That's the problem, if you will, for the Packers. But I do know, last year they liked the linebackers. They liked Patrick Queen. They liked Kenneth Murray. It's just it came down to they like Jordan Love a lot more. That's something that we got to keep in mind too, is they liked the quarterback, more than the inside linebacker. So I'll be interested to see what they can do at that position. But, the other thing I think is we're talking about to win a Super Bowl. My thing is, can you build an elite defense that way? And Green Bay, they've had one elite defense since 2010, and it was that one that happened to win the Super Bowl. They have a few things that haven't worked out. Now, again, I'm not saying that means they got to trade the farm to go up and get a linebacker, but can they find a way to get a different guy and take another swing on somebody like I mentioned, Jabril Cox, Buddy Johnson, Jamin Davis, if he's there later, guys like that. I think they should be taking more swings like that. When you mention that Oren Burks selection, when you consider the draft capital spent on him and the way he's panned out, in my opinion, other than J.K. Scott, because kickers and punters suck, but Oren Burks is the worst selection the Packers have made in the Brian Gutekunst era. I don't think there's any question about that at this point, based on what we can judge. Like, you can't judge Jordan Love and AJ Dillon and Josiah DeGuara in that class, because obviously it's only been a year. Even with the Rashawn Gary class at this point, Gary and Savage and all those guys have shown enough to the point where even if that's all they ever are, that's more than Oren Burks ever showed. So Burks, in my estimation, is the worst player that Green Bay's ever drafted in the Gutekunst era. So Jake, if you want to say something, please unmute yourself, because I saw you talking and nothing.
I was wondering why you were just ignoring me. Odie was being annoying in here, so I had to let him out and mute myself. I was just saying, you can make the argument that DeGuara and Dillon have been more impactful as top 100 picks than Oren Burks has been. So yeah,
I agree.
I agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
So here's my thing with this year's draft is I do think when you look at their linebacker room, they've got Barnes and they've got Martin. Those guys, I think, are going to be around. And obviously they do some stuff.
And I don't want to go that. I like Martin. I like Kamal Martin a lot. I liked him coming out of Minnesota last year. I love his length and athleticism. Like, he could be a really nice player in Green Bay, but I kind of, and you talk about, stud defenses, top 5, top 10 defenses. They all have inside linebackers. Like, those guys just don't not have that position. Like, the Seahawks had KJ Wright, Bobby Wagner last year, the Bucks with David and White. And you look at the Niners with Warner, and when they had Borland there, and they just have dudes. They just have guys that are good. And it's not just because the scheme is good. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg type thing too, right? Like, is it the scheme that's making them look good, or is it them making the scheme look good? And I think it's them making the scheme look good. And so it's just like, okay, I think you might have one really, really, above average good inside linebacker between Barnes and Martin. Like, one of those guys could step up and be that dude. But where is your stud? Where is your playmaker? Where is your Fred Warner? Where is your Devin White? That's who they need to go find. And I don't know where they're going to find them, because those guys, they come up from all over the place.
Yeah. And that's why I said, again, just take a few more swings, and, it doesn't have to be a guy in the first round, but maybe not Ty Summers in the 7th round as your only line. Nothing against Ty. I mean, he's done a good enough job as a special teamer, but he's just not going to be a linebacker for this team. So if you look in at the linebacker room, I do think that they pick one. I would be very surprised, for, like you said, Parsons isn't going to be there. If he is, he's not on Green Bay's board. I think it's pretty safe to say that. Mm-hmm. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, I think I just got it. So yay me.
You nailed it. That sounds right. That sounds really good. Nice job.
Good enough. I think that he's somebody that Green Bay could take, but I don't see that as someone that will be available in a likely scenario. I don't like to be he won't be there guy, but I don't think he'll be available. So then you're talking about Zaven Collins. And for Zaven Collins to be picked by Green Bay, that's another scenario where, again, I think we're talking about the tackles are gone, the corners are gone. And even if that kind of something happens, I think Green Bay would just trade out if something like that were to happen. So I'd be interested to see that.
Lambo Labo literally just took the words out of my mouth. I was going to interrupt you and say we haven't even talked about Nick Bolton yet. And we haven't. But, man, Nick Bolton's another weird one, right? Like, he's probably not going to be there at 62, but I probably wouldn't want to take him at 29. He's just, man, he's a good player, though. He's a good player. He's just, that's a tall glass of milk, that you just kind of take. You're like, oh, cool, man, that's the pick. That's one of those picks that you're just like, man, if that's the pick, you're like, okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a few linebackers that they can take where it's just, I mean, to me, like the only linebackers I'm jumping up and down for is like, if they get Jabril Cox at pick 62, that's somebody that I'm a really big fan of. Obviously watched him play quite a bit at North Dakota State, and then
him and Davis, man, those two guys, like we've mentioned Darius Leonard already, Cox is going to get that comp because he's a former FCS player, but you look at guys with just wingspans for days and athleticism. I think Jabril right now has shown on tape that he's got it more between the ears, but Jamin Davis has only played one season of big time football for Kentucky. Jamin Davis, he reminds me of Willie Gay last year coming out. Just freak athlete. Why aren't you on the field more? What's going on? Why aren't you playing more? And Kansas City kind of learned the hard way this last year with Willie Gay. He wasn't on the field at Mississippi State for a reason, because he couldn't figure out how to be on the field. And so that's the risk you run as well with these linebackers. Is it's a tough evaluation.
That they are, and it's going to continue to be one in its position that, Green Bay, I assume they'll pick one. I just don't know when. And I think you can safely rule out, because again, like I mentioned, the only linebacker that I would take at 29 is Micah Parsons. And if Micah Parsons is there, then you probably don't want him. And I'm going to say that a million more times, but that's just the way that it is. And if you're not going to take one there, then like I said, take a swing on a guy like Jabril Cox, Jamin Davis, even Nick Bolton. And if he falls, Zaven Collins, if he falls, like you mentioned, I think that's not likely, but if he's sitting there, it's kind of like when, Eddie Lacy was sitting there at 62. And I remember that year people talking about, well, you've got to pick him at 29 or 30 or whatever the hell Green Bay had that year. And then he was sitting there at 62, and it was almost like the perfect pick for them at that spot. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that happens. But again, for them to pick a linebacker in the first round, we're talking every receiver down to Rashad Bateman. And I would even throw in guys like Rondale Moore, Kadarius Toney, players like that Green Bay would have to pass on for me to be, or they would have to be gone for me to be happy. There's not a scenario I could see where they take a guy like Zaven Collins and I'm like, hell yeah, that's awesome. That was the best player left, because I'm sure there'll be an offensive tackle there that I like more. I'm sure there will be a cornerback that I like more. I'm sure there'll be receivers. I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff that'll be there in that scenario. So
Zaven would be like your classic. I can talk myself into that. Like if Zaven Collins was the pick at 29, my initial reaction would probably just be like, oh, but then it's like, okay, I can talk myself into this guy.
I think when's the last time? I think the last time Green Bay took a guy like that for me was Kenny Clark, and it's just because the pick was so boring, for lack of a better term. And obviously, the guy I wanted that year was Noah Spence, and that did not work out. Oof. So I am thankful for Theodore Thompson seeing the light and picking Kenny Clark in that spot. So
Jacob, I got a question for you, because this is something me, you, and Peter have. Peter Bukowski, we got a pretty fun little thread going on Twitter, and I think Peter mentioned Peter mentioned on the one that he does. What's he do? Locked on Packers, only the most popular Packers podcast. But
right.
We're always trying to figure out, like, who is the most Goody pick in round one. And I have someone, and it's kind of started to come to me throughout this very podcast, and I'll let you go, or I'll go first and let you think about it. Let's just focus on the inside linebacker position, the most off the wall pick, the pick that everyone goes, what just happened? They took that guy, the Josiah DeGuara, the AJ Dillon type pick. Baron Browning at 29.
Oof.
First round draft pick. Let me tell you why. Ben Fennell on the show talked about this. NFL teams love 5-star recruits. This is a weird year because the scouting process has been so different. So I think NFL teams are going to rely on other scouts as well, and kind of be like, well, they thought he was a 5-star guy. We think he's pretty good. He's a damn near perfect athlete, RAS type athlete. The tape in college was not always great. Sometimes it was. He's got some good tape. And the reading the tea leaves, when you just kind of look at Twitter, something that everyone can do is look at guys who were third-round picks weeks ago and now are starting to move up in the eyes of the media. That's not because the media went and watched more tape on them. That's because a lot of times you're hearing that because the NFL likes them. The NFL likes this guy a lot. And the NFL does like guys that have the tools. They have the upside. They have the the 5-star pedigree, and then they have the program pedigree. You know who really likes that stuff, Jacob?
Brian Gutekunst.
Brian Gutekunst loves that stuff.
Yeah, I think
and the fact that you're shocked, the shock that I'm saying it is probably means it might happen. Who knows? Probably.
I think that what we'll gather out of that is that Green Bay will probably like him. I would struggle to see. Again, one thing about Gutekunst is he's unpredictable, but he's also predictable in the same sense, which I know doesn't make any sense. But if you look at him, pass rusher or his first round picks, cornerback, pass rusher, pass defender, quarterback. So he does value that premium position early. Would it be different if, now he's picking 29th and 30th instead of, his first 2 drafts, he picked 14th and 12th. So it's a little bit easier, quote unquote, to pick a premier player at a premier position when you have a premier pick. He hasn't had one of those the last couple of years. So I'll be interested to see that. I think that's an interesting point. I'll have to think on that a little bit more of what are the most like Goody picks. And the other thing I think is interesting is the stuff where, who are guys the NFL likes more than Twitter? And, one guy that I think certainly comes to mind is Christian Barmore. I was reading today that somebody thinks that he might be a top 15 pick.
Good.
And
I hope so.
And that's something
let someone good fall to 29.
Well, like you just mentioned, that's somebody that the Packers may not or may target in that spot. But I think the NFL in general is a little bit there. They value it's the same way like, Brian Burns. We all loved him. Everybody on Twitter loved Brian Burns, and he ended up I think he was picked 18th overall. And it's because you and I sit here and say, well, I don't really care whether or not he defends the run, but the NFL does. They're not going to spend a top, 15 pick on a guy that doesn't play all 3 downs or isn't effective on all 3 downs.
And they care that Brian Burns was playing at 220 for most of his career at FSU. And the fact that he put on 40 pounds the last, that's just, and that's stuff we're not privy to. You know what I mean? Like we don't have meetings with these guys. We don't have teams of people doing medical stuff on these guys and teams of people basically digging in and talking to their coaches since they were in middle school, about these guys. So sometimes that works to draft Twitter's favor. And I think Brian Burns is one of those guys that work to people, dummies like you and I's favor. They're like, we love this guy. He's awesome. And NFL teams are going, we like him. We like him. But, there's a couple things that we didn't know about. And so Brian Burns is definitely one of those guys because he's making us all look smart. He's awesome.
Yeah, he is. And that'll be something, the Carolina Panthers, I made the joke last year. They're the team of the guys the Packers could have had, Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel's not there anymore, but Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore was a guy they could have picked in the first round, and Brian Burns over obvious, and Jeremy Chin even now. They just keep adding guys that everybody that Green Bay fans at least seem to love. But we're out of time for this week. Be sure to check us out. Like I mentioned, Game On Wisconsin, Game On WI for Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, all that stuff. Subscribe to us on YouTube. As we've noticed, and as you may have noticed the last couple of days, Periscope is gone. So I need you guys to go to YouTube, subscribe, and hit that bell in the top right corner because you're going to be able to find yourself catching all of our shows and on time. And as, of course, I mentioned, $33. That is our donation to the Aaron Jones Foundation. Use that link below. Be sure to check that out. It's also on the Game On Wisconsin Twitter. But until next week we have Eric Crocker. He will be talking cornerbacks, and I'm really excited about that. Probably the biggest need that the Packers have in the next year coming up next season for everybody. And they have needs both inside and outside as far as that position goes. So I'm looking forward to that. But until then, we'll see you guys next week. We look forward to talking more draft as we're 2 weeks closer. See you guys next time.